So hello everybody and everybody who's connected in streaming. I'm Anna Masera, I'm the moderator today, and we have about an hour, and Dan Gilmore is connected from California, and then here on my right is Natalie Turvey, president of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. On her right is Indira Lakshmanan, the executive editor of the National Geographic Media. And Dan Gilmore, as you know, is from Arizona State University, and he's the one who really wanted this panel, so I'm going to start with him. But I want to make sure you all know that in this room, we are lucky because we have a microphone that's separated, and you can come up on stage and ask questions if you want. So in many other rooms, it wasn't possible to do that because of the COVID restrictions. So we're trying to keep, a lot of time for questions. So in the end, I will ask you if you have questions, and please come up. And I think the microphone is already on. You can ask the question there. So welcome, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. So you proposed this panel, so I'm asking you to introduce the subject. What makes media literacy so urgent now, and how do we fix this problem that has to do with the demand side of information, meaning users? How can it be done at scale? I would like to know from you also why doesn't, or if the USA hasn't done it already, why not? What are the obstacles to media literacy, and what can be done to get rid of it?
If I answer all of that, I'll take the full hour. So I'll give you a very brief synopsis of what I think we need. It's pretty clear at this point that solving the problem of people believing misinformation and spreading it is going to take more than just fixing the supply. We certainly need a better supply of media and information. There's no doubt about that. And we have to really upgrade that as much as we can. But we also have to upgrade ourselves as users of media. And there are many ways to do that. What I've been focusing on for a while is the demand side of that we call media literacy. It's of many digital literacies we need to acquire and use in this digital age. I think media literacy, and it's called other things like news literacy, these are all part of the same puzzle. We have to do it. We have to upgrade ourselves to be better at this. And we, as you said, we have to do this at scale, which means we have to spread it broadly through our society. And this is not a trivial task. It's going to be really hard. There are some steps being taken now. They're not enough, and we need to do more. And how do we get scale? Well, we believe at our little lab at Arizona State University called the News Club, where we're working on this, we think that scale requires three participants in our cultures. The first is education, and that's part of what we do. And education can be from the earliest childhood levels and all the way through life. We think lifelong education includes media literacy. In fact, we have a course, a free online course. I'll send you a URL for it and post it. Second, scale is hard in the US because there's local controlled schools, and it's going to be difficult to make that happen, but we can get as much as we can do. The second place for scale is the media themselves, and journalism has a huge role to play in bringing scale to media literacy. Journalism has not done that. We think that this is a very unfortunate thing, and we're helping, we hope to try and fix that. And media include, by the way, Hollywood, music, and advertising, public relations. We think media generally should be playing a big role. The final place for scale is the companies that define scale in our world today, and that's the media, the platforms. And they are doing a little bit, but we don't think they're doing enough, and we'd like to help them do more. So scale is hard, but we're going to work on it. The US, you asked how we're doing, not well. There's some laws in some states that are requiring some literacies, but it will take a lot more effort by a lot more people. And we're, we're optimistic that it's going to be a slow process. I'll stop with that.
Okay, thank you, Dan, for introducing this. And I will go straight to Indira, who is working in a legacy organization that is an educational media. And so I will ask her, how can media organizations help explain media literacy? And how does yours, I mean, in the National Geographic?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I just want to say that, you know, I've been thinking about media literacy and news literacy for many years now, as everyone on this panel has, and it was interesting to take it from the place of having been the Craig Newmark Journalism Ethics Chair at the Poynter Institute, where I focused so much on basically our role as the media. What can we do to be more accountable, to be more careful about our accuracy, to boost public trust in journalism? And I was really studying why this public trust in journalism had so ruptured from 2016 on, and all the evidence we had, which has been, you know, published by, for example, Craig Silverman, who was at the time with BuzzFeed, an incredible media writer, and how he sort of analyzed how Facebook and other social media sites were taken over by people who were spreading false news or false information. I hate the term fake news, because if it's news, then by definition it's not fake. And if it's, you know, if it's real and factual and accurate. So having spent several years studying why do we believe things that are wrong? How does false information and misinformation or even disinformation spread on the internet? What are the networks? How does this happen? And really thinking about the polarization of our political system. For a bit over 2 years now, I've been happily at a new job as the senior executive editor at National Geographic Media. And we are a general interest media company, but we also have a really strong educational backstory. You know, the founding of National Geographic 134 years ago was specifically with the intent to educate and inform about the planet, the animals, you know, cultures around the world. And so I think that we have always taken our educational role very seriously. And in addition to being the National Geographic flagship magazine that you see in scores of countries around the world in the main English edition, we also have National Geographic Kids, National Geographic Little Kids, National Geographic History Magazine, and of course our online site. And I wanted to bring and share with you today this book that we put out that came out just last year called Breaking the News: What's Real, What's Not, and Why the Difference Matters. So it's a book that we produced essentially for kids, and it's meant to sort of start at the demand side, as Dan so rightly put it, that we can't just fix media with the supply side or fix the problem of misinformation on the supply side. We also have to fix it at the demand side. And what I love about this book we did is that it really gets at the youngest consumers, the future consumers of news. So if you're starting at the age of 5, 6, when you're first starting to read, when you're first exposed to, maybe you're exposed to internet, maybe you're exposed to TikTok, how do you know what's news, what's not, what's real? And some of the things, I'd be happy to pass this book around, but it's, you know, uses visuals, which we're so famous for, and also tells you how you can identify real images versus fake images. Something which I think all of you are probably very familiar with is reverse search on Google or TinEye and other tools that can help you figure out which pictures, the provenance of pictures. At this very conference, there's a really interesting program about the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is being led by Adobe and 700 media and technology companies, and they're trying to authenticate pictures. But basically, what we're trying to do in this is teach kids that from the very beginning you have to be critical of everything you read and everything you see, and don't just take it as being reality. And one quote in here, which I love, this little foreword was written by our former editor-in-chief, Susan Goldberg, and she shares this piece of advice that all of us who came up in legacy newsrooms in newspapers in the United States or newswires were told, which is, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Right? And so the classic that you have to check every single fact, and I remember being told by one of my Metro editors, if the person says his name is Smith, ask him how to spell it. Find out the name of the dog, literally find out everything, check all your facts. So now it's so much harder to tell apart what's real and what's not when so much is coming at you, and particularly kids. I find it fascinating to look at surveys that show when they're asked what their source of news is, kids will cite TikTok. TikTok, of course, we think of it as an entertainment platform. It's not a news platform. But this book and the website that goes with it is all about, how can you tell if a website is fake? How can you detect phony photos? How can you become a fact checker yourself as a kid? How do you uncover your own biases? And how to become more open-minded about information that you might not agree with. So, of course, this is written in a format for children, but I think you sort of have to get people young. I think a lot of our work in the news industry, certainly work that I've been involved in, the Poynter Media Trust Survey and other things, have been so focused on trying to get adults to change their mind. It's hard. I mean, I'm here to tell you, it's hard to get adults who are entrenched to change their mind. And if they're already susceptible to misinformation, it is sometimes, I hate to ever say that it's too late for anything, but I think it's easier to teach kids at the front end how to be a savvy news consumer. And I'm delighted that more and more schools, including my own children's schools, their elementary school, have media literacy programs in place now. That's a growing trend to try to teach kids how to identify those things. So I'd be happy to talk more about that and talk about a series of videos I made about uncovering your own biases and identifying bias in news. It was a series of 8 videos I did for the News Literacy Project, and those are also shown in K through 12 classrooms around the country, around the US. But that's just an introduction to why I think it's so important that we start with kids. And if anyone would like to look at this, I'd be happy to pass it around.
That's great, thank you. And thank you for bringing a hardcover book. I mean, a paper version. Here we are talking about digital literacy, and we're going back to square one, back to books.
We do have the digital website version as well, but it's nice to have something tactile.
So this brings us to a problem that I'm concerned about it's that it's going to take a long time. I mean, if we're talking about starting with kids, it's going to take at least another generation or two before we can talk about spreading media literacy. And so I'm going to ask you, Natalie, since you're presiding, as president of the Canadian Journalism Foundation, which is a foundation that is on the audience side as well. So, I was thinking, how is the Canadian Journalism Foundation tackling the literacy problem, and are you optimistic or pessimistic that we're going to see this problem solved in our lifespan?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It's wonderful to be back with you after a few years. The Canadian Journalism Foundation has been, Anna, working in this space for some 5 years, and we're grappling with a lot of the same issues and questions that Dan and Indira brought up in their introduction. And in the lead up to this panel, I've had a lot of conversations with people at the festival about, is media literacy working? And two positive things I've observed this week, both abroad and here. The first is following the Disinfo Conference 2022 that The Atlantic put on earlier this week with the University of Chicago, featuring world leaders to news leaders, former U.S. President Barack Obama to Maria Ressa, talking about media literacy, disinformation, and trying to find a way to solutions to this phenomenon. We had fantastic academic Joan Donovan as well in that program, and I think it's so important that we're continuing to talk about this. The second thing was listening to journalism philanthropist Craig Newmark talking about his ongoing commitment to programs that combat misinformation. So I found those things very encouraging that we're continuing to talk about this. I was with Dan in 2019 on a panel just across the hall on nutrition labels for news, so another approach to media literacy, and I revisited that panel to see how our approaches have changed and some of the challenges in the media landscape. The CGF has an overriding principle: as journalism goes, so goes democracy. So the tenet of the foundation is ensuring that Canadians have access to reliable sources of news and information so that they can be engaged in their citizenry in our democracy. So it was natural that, Anna, we started on the upgrading the audience side, on inoculating the audience, on the pre-bunking that we're seeing. And if I'm able to show my slide deck, tech hasn't been my strong suit in this conference, I'll take you through our approach and its evolution and why we've changed our thinking around some of our initiatives. Anna, will you help me with the tech piece?
Can we please put the slides on, because Natalie has some slides.
Oh,
Okay,
it's on.
perfect.
Okay. Thank you. So, like Indira, we started with youth in 2018 and thought that was the logical approach. We partnered with a civic engagement organization to create a curriculum for school-age children 8 to 18 to teach them the tools and skills in school to find and filter accurate sources of news and information, but also to connect students to the importance of journalism, to civic engagement, and to a healthy democracy. When I was last here with Dan, we announced that we, through this partnership, we're in 98% of school boards across Canada in 2 different languages. So we were sharing that at the time. In parallel, in 2019, we were also doing some research in the landscape, and others were. And what came out in the studies and research that that the kids were all right. It wasn't the youth at that time that was the issue. That we were seeing the older cohort, the 65 plus, that were in our research 4 times more likely to share pieces of misinformation on social media platforms. So we started to turn our attention to voting age Canadians, to create a program for them. In our research, 90% of Canadians at the time in 2019 admitted to falling for misinformation, and only 1/3 of Canadians were checking news and information before sharing it. So we consulted with journalism experts and academics, journalists, newsrooms at the time, and we'd seen a lot of checklist approaches, and that's why I love your approach so much, Indira, with kids. And we wanted to apply some of that same principle to our program for voting age Canadians, using humor, using graphics that people will engage in, being present across all the channels where you're seeing misinformation, mirroring some of those same themes, but turning them on their head. And we launched a program called Doubt It, which speaks to the same ethos that Indira outlined, that gut check. If you doubt it, then you take that moment before sharing it, check it, challenge it. Oh, there we go. So we launched with a national quiz to test people's media literacy chops, and it was highly shareable across social media. Fun graphics, digital ads that became very viral in this campaign. And then we partnered with notable Canadian media. So journalists you'd see on your nightly newscast to do PSAs for us, 10, 30-second minutes to a minute spots that ran across social media that identified that point where people were sharing misinformation. And worked with YouTube influencers to get the other spectrum of that generation, the 18 plus, on everything from video manipulation, cheap fakes to deep fakes in this campaign. And the whole premise of the campaign is if you can build these small habits, this is a huge problem, but if you can take little steps every day to check, to doubt it, check it, challenge it, then you can build these important media literacy muscles. Of course, in the pandemic, we turned our attention to COVID-19 misinformation with a program, a national social campaign called Keep Truth Well, aimed to inoculate the public against COVID-19 and vaccine misinformation. We also went back into the field with research and found that Canadians who followed the news at least once a day were 60 to 70% more likely to be receptive to getting the vaccine when it came out, compared to those who didn't consume daily. So that survey showed that clear link, that research showed the clear link between Canadians' enthusiasm for the vaccine and their trust in news. We then continued with that campaign, and again, identifying some of the misinformation themes that we saw on social media, and again, turning them on their head, whether it was scammers preying on people to snake oil salesmen with alternate cures at the time. And our other campaign that has been going on in parallel is World News Day, that I had the pleasure of speaking to earlier today, that Indira and Nat Geo have participated in. And that's what Dan spoke to the newsroom piece, the journalism piece. This campaign connects newsrooms from around the world with the public to demonstrate the power, the impact of their journalism to affect positive change in lives and communities. And the aim is ultimately media literacy, but also to build trust with news organizations and their audience. Now, Anna asked the question about whether I'm optimistic. I'm eternally optimistic. I started with optimism, but Anna, I can't speak for the audience side. I can speak to what journalists are doing every day to show the work they're doing to build trust and transparency, but I can't speak to, we can't speak to the audience. And, I end this panel saying we're all doing incredible work, and I think it is so important to equip people with those critical thinking skills. But I find myself, Indira, and others asking, are we making an impact in the landscape today in media literacy? And that's part of why I'm here with all of you today.
Thank you, Natalie. And I would like if from the back you could put back Dan Gilmore on. I would like to see him again connected if it's possible. Here you are, Dan. So you heard both Indira and Natalie, and I'm sure you have things you want to add to this. And the one question, of course, that still needs to be answered is, do we think we can solve the media literacy problem? Do you think this proposal is feasible?
If you allow me, I'll rephrase that a little bit. I think we need to solve a larger societal problem of public trust in things that they should trust. And that's not going to be solved solely by media literacy. This is one component of many. And I'm anxious that we don't focus only or predominantly on the consumer side. And I love the projects that we just saw from our other panelists. Those are great. And they are certainly components in the overall effort that has to be made. There are so many pieces to it that we need to look at. But I'm delighted to see more and more of these things aimed at people who are trying to make their way through this jungle of media. But it's important that we also add the reality that we are all not just consumers, but creators as well of media. And we did hear a little bit there about that place where media consumption and creation intersect, which is sharing. That's an important, really crucial piece to help people not share stuff that's wrong. And we've all done it. If anyone here who's on social media in any significant way, I guarantee any of us has done it. And it's embarrassing. So I think that's helpful to be embarrassed once in a while by something you do wrong. Then maybe you don't do it again or try not to. If we can think about this in a holistic way, that we have to find common ground with folks who we don't agree with on some political issues, to want to get reality back into our lives, I think that's going to help too. But this is going to take a while. We've spent a long time digging ourselves into this hole, and it's going to take quite a while getting out. But I think at least we've discovered or rediscovered the first rule when you're digging yourself into a hole, which is to stop digging. We're doing that.
Okay. I was wondering how many people in the room here are European? I mean, okay. Because I figured since we have a panel of Americans and Canadians, we should also talk about what Europe is doing for media literacy. And you know that the European Commission and the Council of Europe have actually been tackling the problem recently a lot. There's an incredible amount of work, and you can find online of an incredible amount of material that's at the disposal of Europeans and European institutions and educational programs and programs that are toolkits for teachers and for students, toolkits that are all online for free. And Europe has been really actually at the forefront on this. And there's incredible amounts of think tanks also around Europe trying to help solve the problem. As Dan said, you know, there's to do it at scale, there's the three levers. One is education, the other one is media, and the other one is platform companies. And in terms of education, Europe has definitely been giving a lot of tools to countries to face the problem. And so as we were saying, for the kids, for the future, to tell you the truth, I mean, I'm an ex-public editor of a major Italian newspaper, and I know that we, the media, have a lot of responsibility because we lost the trust of the readers and we have to gain the trust back. So the trust problem is huge. And so I know that while on the kids level, I'm very optimistic that all these educational tools and books and kits and are going to help, because kids will grow up more literate digitally and also in terms of the media. I'm pretty worried about the adult side because adults really don't have all this it's available to them, but we don't reach out to adults the same way we reach out to kids, because adults don't have to go to school, so there's no mandatory education after they become adult. And so the problem is that it's up to them to look out for themselves, to try to be able to understand what's true and what's false, and to be able to be literate in the media and literate also digitally. Often digital illiteracy goes hand in hand with media illiteracy and vice versa. Media illiteracy is also digital illiteracy, and in Europe more so, I think, because especially in Italy, a lot of people really are not, a lot of adults, I mean, are not, don't have access to digital information. They don't access the internet still. So, I mean, a lot of people in Italy don't have that kind of access. And the other huge problem, I think, that is creating illiteracy is the problem of the haves and have-nots. I mean, media is now more and more closed behind paywalls. And so the so-called quality media is behind paywall. And the free media, a lot of the times, that's where a lot of misinformation keeps running. And so people have a lot of misinformation available for free, and everything else is under paywall. And so all they see is the headlines at the most, and they don't access it. And very few people access paywalls. So this, I think, is creating a tremendous amount of more illiterate people in terms of media because of that. And I wonder what the panelists here have to say about that. Is there a solution to the problem of paywalls creating a society of people who do not access information, quality information? I should start probably with Indira, and then with Natalie, and then again to close up with Dan, and so then I can leave questions open to the public.
I have a lot of thoughts about this because whenever I post stories on social media that, I'm proud of, if they happen to be paywalled, I get lots of hate in my feed from people saying, I would read this, but it's paywalled. And I have to explain that, quality journalism costs money. That, we have to pay reporters and editors and photographers, that this is not fake stuff that we're taking for free, stealing from stock agencies and just slapping up there, or it's not someone in their mother's basement writing out of their imagination. We're actually sending people to Afghanistan, to Ukraine, that we're actually sending people around the world to tell stories. And I speak not just for myself, but for all quality media organizations. And it's always frustrated me that people don't want to pay for news, because prior to digital, people did pay for newspapers. Maybe it was a quarter, maybe it was a nickel, maybe it was cheaper way, way back in the day, but people did pay for news. And of course, in places like Britain, they pay for their public television. They pay for the BBC through television licenses. In the United States, we pay for television in that we are forced to watch ads. If you're watching linear television, you watch ads, or you pay for it because you buy a streaming service that is a subscription streaming service in which you're paying for the service of not having to watch ads. So one way or another, we've always throughout history paid for news, even back when it was pamphlets or, rock carvings. I mean, we've always paid for news in one format or another. And so it frustrates me when people don't, say they don't want to pay. Now, if you cannot pay, we have public libraries. We have nonprofit media that do have free websites. And by the way, lots of organizations like we unpaywalled all of our COVID content. So anything that was COVID was free. The Washington Post did that as well. I think other media may have done that with other things that are seen as just a pure public service. And, we are taking the hit on the cost and making it available to everyone. So it's a tough question that you ask. As I say, one way to address that is to take down paywalls for critically important public service information. Before coming to Nat Geo, I was the executive editor at the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, which is an entire institution dedicated to finding, to supporting important critical stories that wouldn't otherwise be told because people wouldn't have, journalism organizations don't have the money to tell them. So that's grant funding for those stories. And then we made all of the stories available for free on our website. So if we supported the New York Times on a story, if we helped AP on a story, it didn't matter who it was. If they were paywalled, the agreement was they had to give us the content that we then supported them to do, and we would put it for free on our website to anyone, for anyone to read for free. So I guess my answer is multi-layered. There are ways to get good quality content through organizations like PulitzerCenter.org and other places that are making the information available for free. We've seen in the last 5-10 years, at the same time that we've had rising problems with misinformation, we've also seen a great rise in philanthropy that is helping nonprofit news sites, from hyper-local ones to major global ones. And philanthropists like Craig Newmark and others taking an interest in supporting reliable information. So I honestly think the information is out there, and maybe we need to create a path that makes it easier to find it. Maybe that's an answer. I also wish that people would dedicate part of, even a limited household budget. If you're going to spend for HBO, well, boy, I wish, if you're spending $16 a month for HBO, I wish you would be willing to spend, $5 a month to donate to your public radio station, which is giving you all of that for free, or your PBS, your public television station that's giving you that for free, or to your local newspaper. And I think The Guardian does a really good job of saying, we're giving this to you for free, but please help us. It costs us to make news. It costs us to produce news, so please make a donation. And they've had quite a lot of success with that kind of membership model.
I think Indira touched on a lot of the thorny pieces of that question. What we try to do, and where you started, Indira, is a lot around that education piece as well. So we conducted, in parallel with some of the research I highlighted, focus groups where we sat behind the glass with informed Canadians, general population, and questions around news. And I was staggered to see in both populations there really is that lack of understanding that big investigative stories with impact cost a lot of money. And a lot of that population, they feel news is ubiquitous. It's on, television channels and doctors' offices. And those were a lot of the answers, and not even really understanding a lot of the models for funding journalism in Canada. So part of our mandate is a lot around that education piece, as well, demystifying what goes into that journalism. With our youth program, we were able to get Canada's big news outlets to sign on to provide students with the unpaywalled content. Same phenomenon, Indira, with COVID. Keeping Canadians safe and informed news was all free of paywall. But I think it is a really thorny issue, and steering people to those pathways where they can obtain content, I think is one of the solutions. But it is indeed a challenge.
Well, Dan, you heard everything, right? So I'll leave it up to you to wrap up this last question before I open to questions from the public.
I'll be brief because I do want to hear what questions the audience has. I'd like us to think beyond traditional news in answering this question. Alan Rusberger, in a panel yesterday, put it well when he said that he fears a trend toward solid news coverage for people with money and rubbish for everybody else. I don't think it's going to be that bad, but that is certainly part of a trend we're seeing. I'm not worried as much about investigative because philanthropy is seeming to fill the gap pretty well on that. It's the local, and I'm speaking mostly about the US here, so forgive me on that. The local is the place that's the most threatened here. And I think that it's inconceivable that advertising is ever going to support that again, and that we have to go to not-for-profit, collaborative, cooperative models. And at the hyper-local level, that media, that news at the hyper-local level will be done by people talking with each other. We have in our little town, south of San Francisco, a Facebook group run by an expert moderator who basically says the only rule here is no national politics. So in our group, we talk about things, people who really, a bunch of people who do not agree with each other, and putting it mildly on national politics, but who can come together to work for things in our little town and to think about what matters and what's actually happening. That's the future, that kind of thing, and cooperatives and other is where local is going to go, I think, inevitably. And there's no business model for community theater, and there's no business model per se for hyperlocal journalism. We have to do this ourselves, and we need help. That's the key. We can get people to learn principles of journalism without ever even using the word journalism, but we can do things ourselves if we know how, and that's what we're going to have to do. But I think that we have to get away from the thinking of traditional journalism as the only way that news is going to come to people, even as we find business models to support things that we do need.
So, questions from the audience, please come up here. You can speak in the, so everybody can hear you even from the streaming. You can come up here and the microphone is on. Yeah, and you can take the mask down when you're speaking. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Daniel McKissick. I'm with... Is that on? I think so. Is that better? You guys can hear me, yeah? Yeah, okay.
I can hear.
Okay, good.
My name is Daniel McKissick. I'm with Stone Transparency. We're a group of academics and journalists that started a tool, built a free tool for journalists and researchers to capture, share, embed, and ultimately monetize the research journey behind their stories. There was a study from MIT a couple of months ago that used a term called procedural news knowledge, which I quite liked, in correlation with increased trust and media literacy, and decreasing the sort of rates at which disinformation and misinformation was being shared. So those who possessed this procedural news knowledge were more likely to trust and less likely to share rubbish. There seems to be, though, a clash between the kind of sort of raw, authentic transparency, behind the scenes kind of stuff that implies, or that kind of knowledge would require, and the sort of tendency to produce and edit and curate content and a lot of the other attempts we see to establish trust with audiences. So I wonder, my question is, what are the kinds of things we might actually need to do differently in that sense? Are we going to need to, I guess, give things up, and be a little bit more willing to sort of put all the cards on the table in order to rebuild trust and establish media literacy? Thank you.
Dan, would you like to answer, or would you prefer that people ask more? Okay, you answer. Go ahead.
I'll quickly answer. Transparency in journalism is a must. And I'm not suggesting that journalists should publish their notebooks with all their notes that they take. If I had published mine, it wouldn't have mattered because no one could have read them and understood them anyway. But if journalists are transparent and adding to that, it's about how they do what they do, why they do what they do, and what goes into the process, that's a really good start toward helping the public be more media literate about how journalism works. But that also involves, it goes further, it takes engagement with the people in the community to understand better how information is gathered and how people can do it themselves. We shouldn't be helping, as journalists, people understand the process only so they can say, oh, you journalists, I worship you. No, that's silly. We should help them understand it so they can do some of it themselves and do it better, among other things. And we've worked on projects of that sort and had some success, but I want to hear more about this MIT program, so please contact me about that.
Hello, my name is Stefan Voss from the German news agency DPA. As Dan and you have talked about the role of journalism in helping media literacy, my question is, I don't even know if a lot of journalists or a high percentage of journalists obtains the skills for media literacy, means open skills that what you've mentioned, image reverse search, geolocation, Google operators, and stuff like that. That is basis needed for debunking things. So I would just like to know your perspective on that. So if we have the role, as Dan says, as media to spread the media skills, the literacy skills, I doubt if we already have the skills in our editorial offices. I would be interested in your position. And the second thing is, it's all about debunking claims when we talk. That's the regular thing. You see claims on your Instagram or TikTok, on Facebook. Debunking claims is fact check, what you have mentioned as well. So my second question is to that, fact checking, we need good examples. So, and I don't see a lot of fact checks so far, media doing fact checks. I just checked it for Canada, for example, just a quick one for a few minutes. I couldn't see a lot there, to be honest. Maybe I was totally wrong, maybe I didn't do the right Googling. But I was just also asking you your position towards that. If media should have such a role, shouldn't we be more skilled to that and do more efforts to show how the right debunking works? Thank you.
And I know you're
Yeah, that's a
the
really good
moderator, but
question.
that one's for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good question that I'd like to answer, because you're right. I mean, and to tell you the truth, from my experience, since we had a panel here on public editing, so I was public editor at a big newspaper, and one of the things I was saying at the other panel is that in the newsroom, I noticed, I mean, the problem is that a lot of journalists are not skilled. I mean, that's why I was saying that digital literacy and media literacy go hand in hand. In the newsroom, that's really important, because a lot of journalists maybe are really literate in terms of doing journalism the old way, and that they never really transformed and upgraded to the digital era. So a lot of the journalists are still analogic, and in the meantime, you know, there's having to have fact-checking groups is strange, because I mean, it should be part of our job to be fact-checking. I mean, journalism should be fact-checking. I mean, that should be our job to begin with. I mean, it's crazy to think of that as another job. I mean, you're the journalist, and then you have the fact-checkers after the journalists. I mean, we should be the ones doing it to begin with. The problem is that with digital media, it gets difficult in a newsroom to fact-check pictures that come from war fronts. If you're not on the war front and you get a picture and it says, and the caption says, you know, it comes in from Reuters, which is a very valuable news source, right? And we believe it completely. We say, this is an attack in Kiev, and we just publish it with the exact caption translated in Italian. We don't fact-check the picture. We just take that for granted. We trust Reuters. So sometimes even Reuters makes a mistake, and maybe they put a caption on the wrong picture, and maybe it wasn't Kiev, it was Mariupol. You know. And if you do that, then the problem is that you lose the trust of the readers, who are more expert than you are, because they've been seeing these pictures and they know all about it, because it's their focus of interest, and so they know more than you journalists, because it's the reader who's there on the ground and can recognize the place, and he's Ukrainian and knows and says, no, that's not Kiev, that's Mariupol. And so you're spreading fake news, you're spreading disinformation or misinformation. I mean, and that makes us lose trust and reputation. So there is a huge problem of literacy in the newsroom, and we have to tackle it. And I'm talking about the average small newsrooms that are not the internationally famous ones that have a lot of money. I mean, I'm talking about newsrooms that I imagine have much higher standards, because they have also invested a lot more in digital. So they have a lot of people helping the journalists in real time, checking, you know, doing reverse search for the Google images, or checking every image they publish before they publish, having a lot of editing. A lot of newsrooms in Italy, and I'm sure it happens everywhere else, not just in Italy, don't have editing. They just publish when things come in. The journalist at the desk publishes whatever he has to publish without having a supervision. And the lack of that hierarchy is not good for the quality of the end quality of the product. So we're talking about basic things, not about literacy, but we're talking about the basics of journalism, really, that has been lost in the rush to become digital and to reach a bigger audience on the new digital platforms, and the rush to be out there for everybody, and with fewer and fewer resources, because let's face it, newspapers are in a huge crisis. So news organizations that are legacy media have huge costs that they carry, and they're trying to invest in digital, but they still have to carry the paper. The paper is what brings the money home, not the digital. So in the end, when I posed the business model problem, the paywall problem, I think it goes back all to that, because the paywall problem The business model problem for the news organization is what will help the news organization survive and thrive and be trustworthy to the public. So it goes hand in hand. And the problem is that in newsrooms that are legacy media, journalists do journalism and they have nothing to do with the business model. The business model is chosen by the publisher, and the publisher doesn't check how journalism is being done. Everything is really separate. In the new organizations, this new startups, the new digital media are more intertwined, where everybody feels entrepreneur and everybody cares about their model, and so they take it upon themselves. And I think that kind of is, things are changing for the better, but the old legacy media are in big trouble right now, I think. And only the ones that have a lot of resources, like the Washington Post, because Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post and gave tons of money to digitalize, they're in great shape, or the New York Times. But around the New York Times and the Washington Post, there's news deserts. And there's struggling news organizations that are hardly surviving, and they're paying very little. In Italy, freelancers are paid like €7 for a story. I mean, we're talking about less than, your cleaning lady who comes for an hour to work for you. I mean, €7 for a story that might take a whole day, So what are we talking about? We're talking about quality going down the drain, because of course they take the first thing they see and they send it. They don't really waste time checking, and they think that time is money, right? So they need to pay more to fact check. So if that happens, this is, the end of quality journalism. So. Dan, bear with us.
Thanks a lot for the explanation, but if you're following what you are saying, I agree with you partly, then Dan can at least skip the second of his list of those who should spread the message then. I agree with you with the problems of journalism, but so then we're only companies and what was the first, education, but no journalism. Is it so?
Yeah, he said companies, education, media, and platform companies. Well, media is not just these kind of news orgs. I mean, media is a lot of other things too, right? Media is not just education. I mean, I'm thinking of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. What are they? They're in between education and media. And maybe we should talk about platform companies. That's the big elephant in the room that we haven't really talked about. Maybe we should talk about platform companies. And since I'm supposed to be the moderator, I would like to ask Indira and Natalie if they have something to say about this, and then back to Dan.
I just wanted to add that we are trying with our public speaker series to tackle some of those issues that you raised because of professional development budgets evaporating in newsrooms. So many freelancers. We run a series virtually, J Talks Live, where we toggle between a media luminary, like we've had the editor of The New Yorker this past year, David Remnick, or the new opinion editor at The New York Times, Katie Kingsbury. And those are very inspirational, aspirational editorial talks, but then we'll toggle to big, the brass tacks of big investigative stories covering the police beat. We spent years on all of the skills that you were talking about when we were launching our programs, bringing the Craig Silvermans and Jane Litvinenkos into our series to talk about what they do every day. And that is our little part, across Canada. And we've seen, a great deal of discoverability in the pandemic that more countries and more people are tuning into these talks. And that's and not to the scale, Anna, of what Reuters is doing with their seminars, but we do try to toggle between imparting those, sharing those lessons with the community.
I was just going to say that I don't necessarily agree that journalists don't have the tools to fact check themselves. Every newsroom I've worked in, journalists have known very well how to do reverse Google search or TinEye or how to fact check their own stories. And I do like what Anna is saying is we're supposed to be our own fact checkers. Like if you happen to work at a place that has the resources to have additional fact checkers, that's great. But I mean, I'm an editor now, and if somebody gives me a story in which they haven't fact checked, that's really bad. I send it back to them. Like I constantly find myself, checking facts and Googling dates and, thinking this should have already been in here in the first place. And if I have freelance writers who've given me copy, because we rely a lot on freelance writers, who've given me copy that is full of holes, that doesn't have basic facts in there, we're not even talking now about misinformation or disinformation or fake news, we're just talking about poor reporting. Right? That's just poor basic reporting. You need to follow the very basic checklist of what do you need to do to report a story and see what the holes are and plug them before you send it to your editor. So I guess that's a combination of two things I'm saying. On the one hand, I think most people, maybe not in tiny, under-resourced newsrooms, but I think at most large organizations, journalists do know how to check their own facts. As I said, I have had some bad experiences, and this is not across the board with freelancers, but I have, and I think it's maybe because they're underpaid. If freelancers are underpaid, and I think we pay quite well, but not everybody does, and if you're just trying to churn it out, then there's a disincentive maybe for people to put things in. But I have an additional issue here, which is that sometimes I think even big news organizations are putting out information with very little context. So it may not be factually wrong, but it's not explained. And I notice this a lot with science and history news because we at Nat Geo specialize so much in science and history news. So there'll be some great big discovery, and I'll see other major, and I mean marquee, bright lights, news organizations putting out the story almost as if it's a press release of what that scientist study said, when we have experts in-house who are archaeologists, who are PhDs in climate science, who will say, well, that's not right. I've actually read the underlying work for this study, and the fill in the blank, I won't name it, blank newspaper, they were totally credulous in putting out that headline. Now, they put it out maybe because they wanted to be first, they wanted to be fast, they wanted to get the UVs and the clicks and the traffic for that. So there's some bad incentives in our system as it currently stands that don't always allow for full context and the most careful reporting. And that's unfortunate. I hope that's something that all newsrooms can work on so that we're not incentivizing people just for speed and traffic, and that we're actually incentivizing for contextualized, carefully reported, factually accurate, 100% backed up information that will stand the test of time.
Thank you, Indira. I totally agree with you, and you totally nailed it. I think we have to. I would like Dan to wrap this up because I'm being told that we have to leave the room in 1 minute. So please, Dan, be quick, and we want to say goodbye to you, but we want to hear you first.
I'm going to wrap it up by changing the subject and say that I think that we should all be giving our deepest thanks to Chris and Ariana and Francesca and this amazing team of staff and volunteers who put this astonishing conference on every year and do such a wonderful job. And thanks to my co-panelists and Anna for moderating here. This is terrific. And last thing I will say is that there is only one place on the planet Earth where it is ever appropriate to put the words journalism and festival together, and you're there.
Thank you, Dan.